system, you will be serving some other person, that system. And therefore your scope will be limited to this dunya. There you will die and the only thing you will attain is this dunya. Whilst if you follow the justice of Islam, then you will become the slave of Allah. And when you become the slave of Allah and you die, for you is the vast expansion of the hereafter. And then Rabi radiallahu anhu said to Rustam, he said, if you accept what we have brought, then we will go back. But if you refuse, then we will fight you until we reach the promise of Allah. If you accept, then we will go back. And this shows that these people weren't interested in conquering other people. All they were concerned was spreading justice. That's all they were concerned. And this is why they're saying, if you accept, then we will go back. But if you refuse, then we will fight you. Why? Because the Persians were known for their tyranny. When the Persians took over Yemen and the Abyssinian Christians ruled Yemen, the narrations mention that the Abyssinians rebelled. And what the Persians did is that any person who had a drop of Abyssinian blood in him, they killed him. The narrations mention that they would slit the stomach of the women and they would rip their children out. This is how barbaric they were. And this is the nature of most superpowers, that they regard the blood of other people as very light. They regard their blood as important and the blood of other people are very light. Is the blood which ran through the veins of those 1.5 million Iraqis who died under the immoral sanctions of the West any less redder than the blood of those who died in the Twin Towers? Is the blood of those hundreds of people who died in Fallujah for the murder of 4 American contractors any less redder than those blood of those contractors? Yvonne Ridley mentioned that when she went back to Afghanistan, the Americans thought that this place was a Taliban stronghold and they bombed it, and the locals obviously knew it wasn't. And in the morning, when the locals managed to reach this place, they found scores of innocent people dead. And Yvonne Ridley mentioned that I spoke to the general in charge and he just shrugged his shoulders. And she says there was a woman there, she had 9 children and every single one of them passed away. And she mentioned it was like speaking to the living dead. And the next day the Americans came and they, for her 9 children, they gave her £1,000. 9 children, they gave her £1,000. You compare that to how much they took from the Libyans for the Lockerbie bombing. They took $2.6 billion. Why? Because the Prophet ﷺ said that you will be ghutha, you will be the scum of the earth. You will be sick. The rest of humanity will regard you as the 5th columners of humanity. Nobody will take you seriously. And why? Because you will have become the ghutha. You will have become sick because you will be afflicted by wahan. And the Sahaba said, will we be small in number? And the Prophet ﷺ said, you will be huge in number. You will be huge in number. But you will be sick, and your sickness will be that you will be infatuated by this dunya, and naturally when you are infatuated by something you don't want to leave it. And this is the state of the Muslims today. Look at this blood of the Muslims. Really, does anybody take our blood serious? Does anybody take our honor serious? But we have nobody else to blame but besides us, because we are a sick group of people. We have been afflicted, like the Prophet ﷺ said, by wahan. He said, you will be ghutha ka ghutha sayl. You will be the scum of the earth, and the rest of humanity will regard you as the 5th columners of humanity. Nobody will take you seriously, and you will be afflicted by wahan. And he said, wahan was hubbud dunya wa kirahiyatul maut, the love for this dunya and the dislike to leave this dunya. Whilst Allah had created the believers for the hereafter. And then Rustam said to Rabi radiallahu anhu, he said, you say, if I refuse, you will fight me until you reach the promise of Allah. Tell me, what is this promise of Allah? Subhanallah. Rabi said, the promise of Allah is Jannah for those who die fighting, and victory for those who remain behind. Jannah for those who die fighting, and victory for those who remain behind. And then Rustam asked him, he said, tell me, are you their leader? And Rabi radiallahu anhu said, no, I'm not their leader. I am the lowest from amongst them. But the believers are like one body. The believers are like one body. The high assists the low, and the low assists the high. And he was expounding upon the words of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Al-mu'minuna ka-jasadin wahid," that the believers are like one body. If the head hurts, the entire body feels a source of discomfort, and if the eyes hurt, the entire body feels uneasy. And you know, often you hear Westerners saying, what's wrong with these Muslims? Why are they so hung up about Chechnya, about Palestine, about Iraq? The reason is because their suffering is our suffering, their pain is our pain. And because you turn your back upon them, that doesn't mean we are going to turn the back on our brethren. You know, when Israel was created, out of the entire population of Palestine, 22% were Christian Arabs. And today, only 2% remain. There are more Palestinian Christians in Sydney than there are in Palestine. Why? Because Christendom turned their backs on their brethren. The first suicide bomber of the Intifada was a Christian. He was a Christian. And they're suffering for the Muslims. Why? Because the Prophet ﷺ defined us al-mu'minuna ka rajulin wahid, ka jasadin wahid. The believers are like one body. They pain, we pain. But the reality is that the believers are such that they side with the oppressed, no matter who they may be. You look at this Norman Kemba situation, from Hezbollah to the Ikhwan, from Hamas to Islamic Jihad, all of them have pleaded for his release. Every single one. And then Rustam, he went back to his cronies and he had a council with them. And he said, have you ever seen a man who is more articulate and more confident than this man? Who was he speaking about? He was speaking about Rabi radiallahu anhu, who had spent his entire life in bondage. He had no PhD from Harvard, but he was man who Allah loved. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, when Allah loves a person, then he becomes the ears by which he listens. He becomes the eyes by which he sees. He becomes the mouth by which he speaks. He becomes the hand by which he grasps. He becomes the feet by which he walks. And when then this happens, when you become one with Allah, then nothing can defeat you. Nothing can overpower you. And this is what the state that these people had reached. And this is why the believers need to make Allah theirs. Why? Because if you make Allah yours, if you make just Allah yours, then everything around you becomes yours. Because everything belongs to Allah. And if you lose Allah, then you lose everything. You lose everything. And Rustam, he wanted to broker a deal with the Muslims, because Rustam had seen a dream that the angel had descended and it had taken the weapons from the hands of the Persians and he had given it to the Muslims. And he wanted to broker a deal. But his men around him insisted upon fighting. His cronies insisted that they fight. And then a battle ensued. And the battle raged for 5 days. 32,000 men were taking the Superpower